All right. Again, welcome. Thank you, everyone. We do have a special guest, which is Melanie Winter. I'm going to provide a brief presentation about the current state of the drought and aridification in the state of California and the American Southwest. But first, I would like to turn it over to Tara. Tara, I apologize that there were issues logging in, but go ahead and make any announcements. Welcome the group. We'll do the land acknowledgement. I'll do a brief update on legislative matters because it looks like Andrew wasn't able to join us, and then we'll get started with my presentation and Melanie's. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, Andy, do you want to start out with the land acknowledgement first?
Did you want to make the announcements particularly about Michael's upcoming presentation, just because I want to make sure people know what's coming up?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so we're very excited. The LA chapter is going to be hosting a special evening with Michael Zelniker, who you all know well. He's just finished a documentary about the boreal forest called The Issue with Tissue. And we will be doing a special event on August 11th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Everyone's invited. We will be sending more information out with the Zoom link, but mark your calendars. It's going to be a really great evening. We'll watch a little bit of the movie, and then we'll have a discussion with Michael about his experiences. So that's what's happening on August 11th. Michael, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thanks for amplifying this. Grateful. The movie is going to be released this fall, and I'm happy to be able to share it with the chapter. It is called The Issue with Tissue, a Boreal Love Story, because it is my love letter to the boreal and the indigenous peoples who call it home. First Nations that have lived there for many thousands of years sustainably. And what began as a story about trees and toilet paper, as I traveled across the boreal over 42 days, about 12,000 miles, I learned, for instance, that 600 First Nations live across the boreal and have for thousands of years. It is their home, and they've lived there sustainably for all this period, and we have a lot to learn from them. So what began as a story, a narrative about trees and toilet paper, emerged and evolved into a much, much deeper story that runs from trees to toilet paper to treaties, from caribou to carbon to climate change to colonization, from water to indigenous knowledge and stewardship to the way forward. The boreal is an epic landscape, and it demands a large canvas. So aside from having a feature film version, we also have a 5.5-hour series, and that will be released early next year. So thanks for the opportunity to speak with you a little bit about it, and I look forward to sharing it with you in greater detail on August 11th. Thanks, Tara.
Wonderful. The other event that's coming up, we wanted to make sure everyone knows about. As you all know, we have a climate curriculum committee that did an amazing job getting LAUSD to sign on a resolution to provide climate curriculum for K through 12 for all of LAUSD, but now we're focusing on the implementation aspects. So the committee is hosting a climate literacy professional development training. It's going to be, geared towards LAUSD teachers, but they wanted me to make sure everyone knows that you're welcome to attend. Anyone who wants to advocate for getting more climate literacy in the schools should attend. It'll be August 6th from 9 to 3. It's an online event. There are also 2 pre-recorded workshops. All the information is on our website, and we'll also e-blast that information out. So I think that is it for announcements for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And so with that, I will do our land acknowledgement. I'll turn it over to Andrew Ellis. He has agreed graciously to provide a really quick update about what's going on at the federal level and state level. I just want everyone to get roughly a 1-minute announcement of that. So let's begin with our land acknowledgement. So Climate Reality Los Angeles, as an institution composed of individuals with nuanced and distinct backgrounds, acknowledges our presence on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Kizh, Tongva, Tatavian, and Gabrielino peoples, the original and ongoing caretakers and stewards of the land. We further acknowledge that in their place, alternative oppressive social, economic, and governance systems were instituted. These systems employed slavery, servitude, and hierarchy to destructively establish different classes and deprive the right and humanity of certain peoples, primarily marginalizing and oppressing communities of color. Even following the abolition of the most egregious institutions, equality has not yet been established. Privileged classes and peoples remain. It is the outsized responsibility of these groups to utilize that privilege to not only dismantle the existing oppression, but actualize a more perfect union in which equal rights and access of all people are guaranteed. Ultimately, all members of the chapter, regardless of background, stand committed to establishing a culture of repair and betterment that will translate into a genuinely free, fair, and sustainable Los Angeles, free of climate injustice and overall injustice. And again, this is a working land acknowledgement, but it's based on previous input from EDI experts. But I now turn it over graciously to Andrew Ellis to provide us a brief update about something that may or may not pan out, which is the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as California is actually moving forward on a number of impressive environmental fronts from a policy standpoint. So take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Andy. Good to see everybody. Hi, my name is Andrew Ellis, and a lot of people know me, but I just wanted to briefly mention a couple of things that are going on at the federal level from a legislative standpoint that are coming to a head with the Inflation Reduction Act that was negotiated between Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin. It has a number of provisions. Now, this bill needs to be considered under the reconciliation process, which would take it into a 50-50 vote. Assuming we get no Republican support for the IRA 2022, that'll require all 50 senators and then Mrs. Harris, the vice president, to break the tie. The bill contains a lot of provisions. I won't go deeply into it, but I'll just say there's some provisions that contain production tax credits and investment tax credits, and extends some of the in the provisions of the Build Back Better. It contains some differences. So I just want to mention to you that the bill will be considered by Senator Schumer, will be brought to the floor next week. So if we want to support this as a chapter, we need to actually call senators and congressional representatives. Assuming that the parliamentarian says that this bill can be considered as associated with appropriations and money, all of the provisions then will be considered under the reconciliation process. I'm going to put in the chat just some ways that you can contact the Senate and find your representatives. What we would like to do is to call our senators and congressional representatives and express our support for this Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The other thing I want to mention real quick, Andy asked me to talk about what's coming up with the California legislature. In August 2nd, the San Fernando Valley and the Los Angeles legislative folks are meeting at Kathy Schaefer's putting on. So if you want to participate with this group, please message me. My contact information is in the chat right now. We're partnering with San Fernando Valley to move forward on some of these California legislation that are being considered by California Assembly members and the senators right now. So please join us on Tuesday night, August 2nd for the big legislative powwow. And if you have any, if you want to join us here at the Los Angeles chapter, feel free to message me, and we'd love to have you as part of our growing legislative team. Thanks, Andy. I just wanted to mention those, and any questions I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that update. I think it's really important for the chapter to know what's going on from a legislative standpoint, but particularly Michael knows this, our climate moment didn't end up resulting in any major federal legislation, but we now may have an opportunity. Again, like you said, it hinges on what the parliamentarian says. It also hinges on Senator Sinema and fate. So again, federal action is still uncertain, but it looks like we're moving forward, and it will be a mix of continuing traditional oil and gas infrastructure, but also expanding renewables. So again, it does align with at least some of the values that Climate Reality has, and California is making headway as well. SB 54 is a significant piece of plastic reduction legislation that this chapter, the San Fernando Valley chapter, and many environmental orgs endorse. But I do now want to turn it over to water. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly so you all can see. Give me 1 second. And sorry, it's not showing my presentation, so give me a second to find. Sorry, this is just one of those days where technology is not my friend. I apologize. Can everyone see my presentation? Okay, so I did give this presentation to the San Fernando Valley chapter, but I also want to put it out there through digital media, through Zoom for the LA chapter as well. So this is going to be a brief introduction to sustainable water infrastructure and a potential path to water independence. And then following my presentation, you will hear from a true expert, which is Melanie Winter. She again has a monumental understanding of natural-based solutions. So she's really going to talk about natural-based solutions, her work with the Sepulveda Basin, but also its implications throughout other parts of Los Angeles and the state. So I don't want to deprive you of hearing all about her work and her background. So I'm quickly going to give you an overview of sustainable water infrastructure and the current problem. And then Melanie's going to talk about one of the biggest means to achieve a potential solution. It's not the only one, but it's a principal one, which is nature-based solutions. So let's first talk about the problem. So we do need to put the current drought in perspective. You all can see the images. This is pretty much what it looks like. We're all experiencing it right now. California and the Southwest are experiencing the worst mega drought in 1,200 years, but this is part of a historical and ongoing California drought pattern. You can see all the years or series of years that California has been in a drought. You can see there's a brief blip for 2019, for example. But again, the drought keeps returning, which means that drought, or to use the term that Melanie also brought up, which is really critical, aridification of land is a true phenomenon that has gripped California for the better part of 2 centuries now. Again, there are multiple sources or causes of drought: low rainfall, low snowfall, higher temperatures than normal, and dry air masses. Some of this can also be attributed to natural variability, but the thing that I want to point out, especially since we're a climate organization, is climate change and anthropogenic or human-based warming can amplify drought by as much as 8 to 27%. So it's 25% worse potentially because of climate change. And again, already being in a drought, not being able to overcome it, this is a really big or critical exacerbation of the ongoing phenomena and problem that we're experiencing with drought. And again, this is all a result of unsustainable and unchanged water rights, policy, and water infrastructure. Now, we are making headway. I'll talk a little bit about that, but again, we need to do more, and we need to attack it or approach it from multiple fronts. It's also important to understand where our water is going. 50%, Jerry Brown actually wrote this. So 50% goes to nature or to environmental systems and running those. So what does that mean? We can't really touch that because that goes to preserving life, goes to preserving streams, natural ecosystems, which again are still struggling because there's not enough water. 40% goes to agriculture, so that's definitely something because it's human-based. And then 10% is urban, suburban, rural, and municipal. So those are things going to cities. So again, we can conserve, we can save water as a city, but that's only 10% of the overall water usage, at least in California. California is distinct from other states, so that's something to keep in mind. Oops. And then I just want to point out that the problem is really the result of traditional or old solutions that require water, which we don't have, and that are really expensive. So dams and reservoirs, which we are expanding those, that is part of Governor Newsom's new budget plan. But the issue is that we don't have water right now to put in there. So in my opinion, that's one part of the problem. Conservation is insufficient. California's reduced its overall water usage by roughly 7.7%. And yet we're still in this huge drought. So conservation isn't enough and the problem keeps going on. So what are sustainable solutions, or what do those look like? Expanded water recycling. Los Angeles is looking at this and it will move forward with this. They're looking at direct potable recycling of water, but again, that's 2 years out if they get the necessary approval. Rainwater capture, there's an expansion of that through Measure W in LA, for example, but we would need more of that. Honestly, even though LA and certain parts of California don't get that much water, you could get anywhere from a third to half of the water that you need if you actually collected all the rainfall instead of allowing it to go into the oceans as stormwater runoff. But again, that requires having water filtration systems or a means to capture it and either immediately put it back in the system or at least put it back in the ground to be filtered either naturally or synthetically. And then other things we could do, modernizing the electric grid. This would actually reduce the amount of water needed for electrical generation. Right now, traditional or fossil fuel-based electricity requires water for cooling purposes. But if we were to modernize the grid, we would use less water because it would be more efficient. We could also bring on more things like EVs or electrification components. So again, it would be able to handle the increased electrification that we're talking about. And we're going to need to transition to renewable energy, so solar, wind, et cetera, which does not require water for cooling purposes. So those are other key ways to save water. And I talked about how much water goes to agriculture. If we were to transition to sustainable agriculture, I'm sure that Cindy is a huge advocate of this. It would mean growing with far less water and finding more sustainable ways to produce the agriculture that the state needs, that the country needs, and that the world needs. But one of the biggest ones I want to bring up is nature-based solutions. So that means taking out a lot of the concrete that we have to manage our current waterways, be they synthetic or natural waterways, taking that out and replacing it with a natural-based solution, which means basically rebuilding those ecosystems so that they mirror what nature had in mind. So again, actual dirt versus concrete, utilizing trees and flora, fauna to actually maintain a waterway versus engineer. So again, we would still be engineering it, but it would be using the things that a divine being, nature, all that stuff already put in place. Actually putting that into the designs that we have to manage those waterways. But again, I want you to hear from a true expert. So just keep that in mind, that that's what a nature-based solution looks like. And you will hear from Melanie a better example. She will really flesh out what nature-based solutions look like and the power that they have to recharge water supplies. Other visionary things that we can advocate for as a chapter, Andrew was talking about advocacy. We can advocate for local, state, and regional water independence goals. So there are a few of them around, but not many. So I think really you need that visionary statement to push us forward. And then Diana and I have talked about this, an actual coalition of states either that have too much water, because we've seen floods in Kentucky and Missouri, or states that don't have enough. So that's going to be California and most of the Southwest, working together to actually figure out whatever solutions, innovative or traditional, that will work to ensure that we have enough clean and accessible water. So again, that would look like interstate and regional water projects versus location specific or even state specific. And then last but not least, these are key things that we as individuals can do, because I would like to leave us all with an empowering note. We can actually conduct a water audit, see where we're using water, minimize our overall water usage. We can engage in using less water during our everyday activities, whether that's showering, brushing our teeth, doing the dishes, so on and so forth. Installing water efficient equipment, installing water recycling systems within our own homes. Again, one solution would be making water recycling just easier to implement in buildings, less regulation there. We would still want it to be safe, but again, it is sometimes a difficult process to implement. So making that easier would be one solution. Installing rainwater capture systems, that is legal now in California. Incorporating a plant-based diet or adopting a more water conscious diet. So again, just eating things that require less water overall. There are several types of vegetation, as well as meats that require less water versus others. Installing drought tolerant landscaping and smart irrigation systems. We've heard experts talk about that before and how to do it. And last but not least, but we're certainly going to do it as a chapter, reaching out to local, state, and national officials to advocate for all the things that I mentioned: sustainable water infrastructure, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and nature-based waterways. So those are all ways that we can save water, recycle more water, reclaim water, basically just use water more efficiently and better. And hopefully that leaves you on a positive note. But like I said, I'm going to be turning it over now to Melanie, who's really going to delve into what, sorry about that, to what a nature-based solution looks like and all of her experience. So Melanie, without further ado, I will enable sharing for you. Please take it away, and thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. Hopefully you have a better idea of where water is going and how we can conserve and reclaim water. But Melanie is really going to provide that expertise from someone that's been literally in the business and talking about nature-based solutions for several decades. So thank you,
If you
Melanie.
could give me share permissions, I'll go.
You got it. I'm working on that right now. Sorry about that. There you go. You should be able to share. All right, perfect. Thank you, Melanie. Take it away.
Sorry, I apologize if you can hear a buzzing in the background because for some reason I can't make my fan stop churning on my.
Don't worry. Don't apologize. Yeah, and okay, perfect. You got it in slideshow mode. So thanks, Melanie.
Okay. Oh, good Lord, that is not what I wanted at all. Hang on. Okay, so hang on one second. What the hell? Okay. So let's see. You. Good grief. Can I do this? It's not what I wanted. Okay, hang on one second. I'll figure this out.
No worries.
It is one of those days, and if anybody believes in astrology, you know,
I'm
they
guessing
told us it was going to be
I'm
a
guessing
bad
Mercury's in
weekend.
retrograde. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, so let me just see if this works. Nope, it's being very weird. So you're gonna see, yeah, you're gonna see what you're gonna see. There we go. And let me try it again. Okay. There you go. You get the sidebar included.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Yes.
I can't find my way around.
That's
All right,
okay. Take it away.
so hi. I'm going to try to sort of zoom out and zoom in both off of Andrew's introduction here. So I'm the founder and director of a nonprofit. It's been around for 22 years in Los Angeles. And we work on watershed planning. And so we're trying to focus on restoring vital ecosystems in LA County for a regenerative, equitable, just, and climate resilient future. And we do that in a lot of different ways. It's sort of what needs doing. I hear a lot of people trying to use the word watershed more and more recently, but it's very clear they don't really understand what a watershed is. So I'm sure most of you do, but just in case. The watershed is all the area of land that drains to a particular body of water. So it's not just the area along the river. It's not just, you know, it's not just the river. And so watershed-based planning is engaging from a comprehensive perspective, from considering all the different elements in a watershed and trying to consider the full range of challenges and integrate them and maximize the co-benefits. Managing rainwater where it falls is a basic core tenet of watershed management, and working with nature to manage water supply, flood risk, all those things without degrading water quality or destroying natural processes. In Los Angeles, we have very particular challenges. Our rainfall here varies widely from as much as 50 inches a year up at the top of the San Gabriels down to as little as 12 inches in the basin, with some fog on the coast. And we've got this wild cycle of rain, fire, flood. And that can send a lot of sediment out of the mountains and into the basin. Because our mountains are so steep, the rainwater that falls in those mountains moves very quickly down to the urbanized areas. And those urbanized areas we have paved over. And so we have cut off one of the most important ecosystem functions here, which is the recharge of the groundwater basin, but also just soil moisture. We don't have a lot of healthy soil in Los Angeles. So while we are not like San Diego, who doesn't have any groundwater basins that they can rely on, and some other coastal cities, we have these amazing resources of groundwater basins. We've chosen basically not to replenish them and made it difficult for us to use and access. So we worked, doing watershed-based planning, starting out, 20 years ago with the Tahunga-Pacoima, which is the largest subwatershed of the Los Angeles River watershed. It's also one of the most diverse, with all the upper undeveloped watershed and the heavily urbanized East San Fernando Valley. And in that plan, we did a range of different projects, from centralized projects to neighborhood scale projects to distributed projects. About, more than 24 of the projects we proposed in that plan have since been implemented. But the thing about these different scales and different typologies to keep in mind is they have different benefits. So centralized free infrastructure doesn't really have co-benefits to it. It generally will create more problems than it solves. And particularly now with where we are with climate change, it's not the direction that's wise for us to go in. The sort of gray-green infrastructure we've been doing in the last 20 years has benefits if it's on the neighborhood or distributed scale, but you really maximize the benefits when you get to distributed and neighborhood nature-based solutions. And even centralized nature-based solutions is where most of your benefits are going to lie. So our the biggest project that we proposed is in Sepulveda Basin, which is a 2,000-acre site in the middle of the San Fernando Valley that has the Los Angeles River and 5 tributaries running through it, all of which have been channelized to one degree or another. And our recent feasibility study there shows that using a nature-based, process-based approach here, we could restore 8 miles of river and stream. We can increase our groundwater recharge by 5 times. We get a 20% increase in flood protection, a lot more access to the space, more recreation in the space, and a lot more biodiversity in the space. On the neighborhood scale, we implemented a project a while back in partnership with the city near Kaiser in Panorama City. And this is a 3/4 mile long frontage road median. You can see what it looked like before on the top right. It was, asphalt and concrete and some really sad magnolias struggling to survive in the middle of all that heat. And it's close to the Tahunga Wash footprint. So we proposed basically draining the neighborhood, 120 acres, to that median and infiltrating that stormwater to groundwater. And it gets a pretty significant amount of stormwater into the groundwater basin every year. And those pictures are kind of old. It's much more vegetated now, and there's a lot more shade, and it's beautiful. And then going down to the small scale, the parcel-based work that we've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years on is what we call under the umbrella of Water LA. And so this takes rain grading, native and edible landscaping, building healthy soils, permeable paving, rain tanks and cisterns, gray water systems, and infiltration trenches, and then parkway retrofits. And it's something when we talk about watershed management, and one of the fundamental principles there being managing rainwater where it falls, every property in Los Angeles is designed to move water quickly to the gutter in the street. It's at a 2% slope. Everything has always been designed to move your rainwater off your roof into your driveway or into a pipe and into the gutter. And so we wanted to flip that. And we spent a lot of time working with building and safety and looking at where the code could be adjusted and how we could turn that around. And then also working with DWP and Met to try to change some of the turf removal incentive programs. Because if you're going to go to the trouble of removing your turf, you may as well get as much out of it as you can. So we really encourage folks to do some rain grading, to do more than just changing out your landscape, so that you can manage most of the standard storms that we get here wouldn't leave your property, as opposed to being sent quickly off your property and into the street. Because once it hits the gutter, then it's lost to the sea. We don't have the chance to recharge the groundwater basin, and we exacerbate water quality problems, and we increase flood risk. The other benefit of this is it creates some sort of, water sovereignty, some sort of water independence at the household level. With gray water systems and rain tanks in particular, if we have an earthquake, you've got a backup supply. During drought, you can keep your trees happy. You can keep your vegetable gardens going. So having people understand why and how to do these things and creating tools to make that possible was a big piece of this, along with changing a lot of the building safety codes, some of the incentive programs. There's a long way to go still with the incentive programs, but we made a huge progress. So the potential, if you think of it as a small thing, but residential property is 60% of all the developed land in Los Angeles. And you think about how quickly we went from folks having, truck gardens in their yards 100 years ago to suddenly everybody needing to have a manicured lawn and putting all those chemical inputs and all that time into it. That was a massive shift, and it happened pretty quickly. If we can go back in the other direction and not just change out the plants, but also change out the way that your property responds to rainwater, that makes a huge difference. And you think about turf right now, turf is close to being impervious because of its short root system and the fact that you don't really have healthy soil happening at the same time. So private properties make the agencies nervous. They feel like they're responsible and they want to know what's going on and they're in charge. But the potential there is huge. And we really wanted to be able to create tools that folks could access and take on themselves. Our first pilot, these are the stats from the first pilot we did in Panorama City. We've since done 2 others. So right now we've done 50, we've got 70 homes. So the numbers are a lot larger, but this is from our Water LA report, and folks reduced their water use by an average of 25%. They captured a pretty significant amount of stormwater, but I'm going to put an asterisk on that and come back in a second and give you an update. A lot of native landscapes, it's really cost effective. And the parkway basins were pretty amazing. So we had folks at the city doing all the modeling on the water quality improvements, the cost benefit, and the groundwater infiltration. The parkway basins I love when you do have parkways, and not all neighborhoods do, and you don't have a tree, but you want to increase shade. One of the greatest ways to ensure that those trees can have a happy, healthy life is to do a curb cut, so that what water does flow down the gutter when we get rain irrigates them. Once you get them established after the first couple of years, they should be doing fine if we're planting the kind of natives we should be planting in our parkways, and they are being irrigated through with the rainfall by having a curb cut. This also allows the stormwater to infiltrate to groundwater. We designed this working with Brad Lancaster in Tucson, where they've been doing this for a long, long time with great results, and got the city to do 2 versions of this, our version and their version. They've approved and published their version, which makes it a lot harder to do and adds other build components in it and reduces the effectiveness of it. But they have said that if someday we can do you build 10 of yours, I'll build 10 of mine, we'll compare the benefits. If you win, we'll change our standard plan. It'd be great to do that someday, because we did this with the County of Los Angeles a couple of years back, did 30 parkway basins in South LA and East LA. And instead of just modeling the infiltration capacity, we monitored it. So these guys here with the little tiny water truck who work with the county, they came out for the monitoring event. And I said to them, that's the truck? They were like, oh yeah, we won't even use this much water. And I said, you're gonna need to get another truck. And they got very mansplaining and condescending and were like, oh honey, no. We do this all the time, trust me. Well, they were out of there within 20 minutes and going up to get another truck. And so the results that we saw in the modeling, when I showed you from Panorama City, they assumed an inch an hour infiltration rates. And we got great results. What we're seeing over 4 different soil types, the lowest, and this is a clayey soil here, was between 1 inch and 2 inches. But when you had a loam and a sandy loam, we got as high as 10 to 14 inches an hour. We sort of went down at the 18-month period because of our inability to get out there and do some maintenance during the pandemic. But so we figure it's 6 of one, half a dozen, but infiltration rates usually, they go up after the soil is settled and the plant roots have grown in. In any case, this is significantly higher than what they're assuming. And it made the county very nervous. They said that was not possible. And rather than take this and say, wow, this is really cost effective, let's try to make sure we can get to scale with this, they have done everything they can to bury it. So yay, progress. So zooming out a little bit, we have all these planning efforts that have been going on in Los Angeles for quite a while. The Stormwater Capture Master Plan, Bureau of Reclamation's Water Conservation Study, the Water Quality EWIMPs, the city and the county both have their sustainability plans. In all of those, they highlight the water LA work, the parcel-based work, the nature-based work, doing watershed-based stuff. And then we have Measure W, which is supposed to be for nature-based, community benefiting projects. But that's not what's been happening. We know that we need to move away from this large-scale 20th century Mulholland big boy engineer solve all problems by controlling nature stuff and get down to looking at what's happening on the ground and working with nature. But that's not what makes the engineers at the municipalities comfortable. It actually makes them very uncomfortable. So they've taken a pivot lately. And what they've done instead is propose other kinds of projects like the LA River Master Plan, which intends to double down on concrete, like Operation Next, which they're now rebranding as Pure Water, which is the regional recycled water program. And this, for instance, the LA River proposal is, let's raise the channel walls, let's build a bypass tunnel, let's remove all the vegetation, let's pave the soft bottom over. This is how they think. And then this is where all the engineers are putting all their interest, is the regional recycled water project. Now, what you're seeing here with the pink dotted lines and the pink solid lines and the blue ones as well and the green ones as well, this is all new infrastructure that needs to be built. It's a lot of miles. It's new infrastructure that will require concrete and steel and a lot of construction work. And it is reliant on Hyperion primarily, which you may have seen in the news, most recently last year, but over the last couple of decades, many times as malfunctioning and doing sewage spills, and it's 40 years old, and we're going to invest all of our resources in an outdated, centralized water treatment facility for our drinking water supply in earthquake country. And think about Hyperion, where it is down here in Playa, pumping all the way up to the Jensen plant upstream against gravity and the energy that requires on top of what it takes to build all this new infrastructure all throughout the county of Los Angeles. So they're excited. They call it their Mulholland moment, with an absolute lack of self-awareness about Mulholland's full legacy. So when you consider the impacts of climate change, which you are all well familiar, and you appreciate that we have to address both the climate and biodiversity crises together, we have to transform the way we do these things. So the sort of 20th century command and control approach to things is not going to get us something that addresses both climate change and biodiversity together. We're not going to get the co-benefits we need. We have limited amounts of resources and a limited amount of time. You know this. You may not be aware of the flood risk we face, but for those who aren't, you're probably all familiar with the Great Shakeout report that USGS did about a decade ago about the earthquake risk in California and what the damages would be when the big one hits. That resulted in a decade worth of legislation and building code changes and a lot of frenzied activity to make us more safe. A couple of years after the Great Shakeout, the same team from USGS did the arc storm scenario, which is essentially, let's look at the storm that happened in the middle of the 1800s, in the 1860s, and what happens to California when that sort of storm event hits us again? And it's called arc storm because atmospheric river event. And as you know, with the jet stream, with the raising temperatures, the moisture in the air gets more intense, or as we're seeing around the world, rainfall is more extreme. It's going to happen in California. They looked at that at a statewide level and said the odds of it happening in the next 30 years are about the same, if not a little bit higher than the big earthquake hitting, but the costs and the damages are significantly worse. And instead of seeing a lot of activity at the state level, there was crickets, and crickets remain. We haven't had our flood maps updated in 40 years, and that remains. We don't talk about flood risk. Agencies in charge here in Los Angeles don't want people to know because they don't want people mad at them. So here we are, cartoon break. The one on the bottom is here because the Operation Next Recycle Water Program is going to be upwards of $15 billion. And no one has balked at that. When you talk about investing a lot of money in nature-based solutions, that's when you start going, whoa, 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 that's expensive. That would take too much money. So we seem to be still comfortable with investing a lot of money in engineered approaches without asking a lot of questions. But we're still uncomfortable with investing in the natural world. The top cartoon is not really a cartoon, it's a picture. And that is a blueberry muffin. And that is my analogy for nature-based solutions in Los Angeles. Measure W prioritizes nature-based solutions. The nature-based solutions that have been funded in Measure W are akin to that blueberry muffin. They are not nature-based solutions. They're starting to use nature-based solutions in the same way they used green infrastructure, which to them was basically the same gray infrastructure we've always built, but we have to landscape it now. So pressure needs to continue on the city, the county, and all the other cities who use Measure W money to literally prioritize nature-based solutions and community benefits that come with them. And by community benefits, that's the co-benefits that come along with doing nature-based solutions. What they're doing is, like with the Regional Recycled Water Program, like with the plans to channelize the river, like with their quote-unquote nature-based solutions, they're largely concrete and steel. As you know, cement, and therefore concrete, it's 8% of the global carbon emissions. Steel is right behind it. So we do have to use a lot of concrete and steel for our transportation projects and in our housing. We don't have to use those carbon intensive resources in our water infrastructure. If we don't have to, we should take another path. And that path is nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions can address global carbon targets in the range of 30%. Healthy soils and healthy landscapes infiltrate and hold water weight. They sequester carbon, and a diverse structure of these is super effective at absorbing carbon, particularly wetlands and riparian systems. That cannot be said about the infrastructure that our engineers are hyper-focused on right now. So wetlands, including rivers, creeks, and streams, are some of the most effective. They are the most effective terrestrial habitats for carbon sequestration, primarily freshwater wetlands. And believe it or not, we have them in Los Angeles and we could have them again. Andrew sort of touched on how climate is impacting our traditional water supply, Colorado River. We will not be getting 990,000 acre feet a year from any of these sources. These numbers will be going down because of climate change. We will not be seeing these inputs. This is what it has been historically for the last number of decades. But if you look at these numbers and you add them up, and then you look at this number, they're very close. So what we've done is created a system that imports about the same amount of water as our land use was designed to throw away quickly. And that's not super sustainable. As I said, we get a lot of rain up in the San Gabriels, much less in the basin and the valley base, but that water moves quickly down to the basin and the valley base because of the height of those mountains. We do have significant flood risk. This is the only stretch of the Los Angeles River that has seen an update since the 80s. This was done in around 2010, wasn't released until about 5 years later for the city's LA River Master Plan. But still, this FEMA map did not account for climate change. FEMA still hasn't made that policy change where their flood risk mapping accounts for climate change. FEMA is also in massive debt. So we've been trying to do a workaround to get the kind of risk mapping updates that we need. But there are 6,000 properties at risk just along the river, and I'm not even mentioning the tributaries. If any of you live near a tributary, you probably think you're fine. Don't just trust that. Particular tribs, well, a number of different tributaries in Los Angeles have significant flood risk that most people are unaware of. Our soils are a huge opportunity. So the bluer and the greener that we are, the more opportunities we have to get that water that comes from those mountains down into our local groundwater basins. And there's our local groundwater basins. The interesting thing is, if you look at where our waterways go and where our groundwater basins are, where our park needs are, they kind of overlap pretty nicely. You're also seeing, not surprisingly, our heat maps overlay also where the park needs are. So if you're looking to solve more than one problem at a time, looking at all those considerations helps you design and consider the kind of project you may need. Another opportunity, of course, is how we manage our land use. And we have decided that so much of it should be dedicated to cars. This is Los Angeles County, and that blue square is 110,000 acres that are dedicated to park cars in Los Angeles. If you add in how many acres are for moving cars in Los Angeles, that square would get even larger. And that is not something that is going to be helpful as we move forward for either heat or water. So key elements as we think about water projects and what to do moving forward is to address climate change and biodiversity together, invest in projects that sharply reduce emissions, and do not invest in projects that increase emissions or fail to reduce them. That I can't stress enough. Replicate and scale successful policies and projects. We have a habit of doing what we call pilots and then leaving them as pilots and not using them to transform standard practice. We need to do much better coordination and integration across different sectors. So that's like having social scientists doing the work, having biological scientists. I think we have like 3 now in the city of Los Angeles, where we used to have 0. We need to significantly ramp up and move away from the sort of siloed expertise of civil engineers and have a much more cross-sectoral civil society. And we need to have inclusive governance structures, obviously. So we need to move fast on this. For every dollar we spend on pre-disaster hazard mitigation, we can save 6 in future disaster recovery costs. We have to lead with science, and we cannot discount externalities or embodied carbon. And right now, no one is accounting for embodied carbon. Part of that is because no one has the approved mechanism, and the state of California would do well to focus on that in short term. But when Metropolitan Water District, for instance, did their climate action plan, I pressed them on this, and they said, you know, there wasn't an agreed upon mechanism to do that, so they were just not going to do it. But if we're not looking at the embodied carbon in these big infrastructure projects, we cannot call them climate smart. We can't make a good judgment on how our money is being spent. We don't have a true cost benefit analysis. Nature-based solutions we know are cost effective, and we need to redesign our urban grid from a systems perspective to restore more ecosystem function rather than to prioritize the automobile above all. So again, incorporate diverse expertise into planning. Healthy soils is really underlies everything here. And we have to provide real incentives for people to do things at the parcel scale. Anything you do upstream is going to increase or decrease downstream safety. So that's something we don't think about a lot, and we're getting much better at ensuring that we are prioritizing investments in climate impacted, disadvantaged communities. But we also have to be mindful that if we don't focus upstream, we're not going to mitigate our downstream risk, as well as balancing out this. And all of our investments need to move us towards where we need to be. So when you hear water folks talk about using every tool in the toolbox, and we have a one water approach, what they're not saying is, sure, all the tools in the toolbox will give you $1.50 for stormwater capture, maybe $3.50 for conservation, but $95 out of 100 is going to go to our regional recycled water projects, like it or not. That's them using every tool in the toolbox. That's them taking a one water approach. Don't buy it. We have to push for a better balance with climate in mind, right? And climate here in Los Angeles is going to rely on having more pervious surfaces, and more healthy soils. So these infrastructure investments have to include co-benefits, and they have to account for embodied carbon. We need to advocate for a goal of 30% impervious surface reduction by 2035. So if you're working on any of your community plan updates in Los Angeles, the ones that are happening everywhere, push the planners to put an actual target, to put a target in your plan, to go for impervious surface reduction, to differentiate between patios and terraces as open space and legitimate living open space. Push on those things, or else we're not going to get there. Nature-based solutions, if you're concerned, what is it actually? Because I've seen folks, get approved on Measure W with things that have nothing to do with nature-based solutions and are 95% concrete. Nature-based solutions are those that legitimately restore ecosystem functions and use nature to do it. So all of our investments in water infrastructure should move us towards carbon neutrality. 30% of our investments should be in nature, and we desperately need updated flood risk maps that incorporate climate data. That's my speed presentation.
Melanie, thank you so much. I know we're a little bit over, and thank you, Michael, for joining us. We really appreciate it. So Melanie, I don't know if you saw it. Charles actually asked if there's any way to get the deck as well as to become more involved with the projects that you're involved in. Again, I'm not the expert and it is your deck. So do you mind answering his question? And then I do have a quick couple follow-ups as well as if anyone else has follow-ups, but thank you everyone that joined us.
The deck, you mean instead of the recording the PowerPoint?
Charles, do you want to elaborate on
You
what you're
asking
looking for?
for?
Sorry, it's a question. Oh, Charles, you're muted, sorry.
Dummy me, sorry. That's like rookie mistake. Yeah, Melanie, I know I see you in a lot of the same meetings. We have attended some of the same things. And I end up speaking to a lot of groups about promoting natives and promoting habitat and biodiversity and things like that. And I want to incorporate some of your statistics. I would make my own slides, but I'd like to be able to incorporate.
Have you downloaded the Water LA report?
No, I haven't. And
That would be a lot of the stuff that I put up here is from the Water LA report.
I was just trying that, and the website wasn't working for me.
What?
It gave me an error message.
Oh my God, thank you. I will look into that. That is terrifying. Shoot me an email. I'll send you something like a link that works and stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
What's the email?
winter@theriverproject.org.
I'll put it in the chat.
Great.
Thank you.
And then Charles, you had a question about getting more involved specifically with the river project, or?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a Water LA speech like pre-COVID years ago and was peripherally involved, and but I haven't been involved in what you guys have done since then. And this is really complementary with stuff. I'm on the board of directors at Westwood Greenway, and heavily involved with TPF and CMPS, and this dovetails so nicely with so much of the messaging I do. I'd like to
Yeah.
get more involved and support what you're doing if I can.
Yeah, I mean, we can, let's have a chat. I mean, you're talking about all the same stuff we've been talking
Yeah.
about for the last decade. I think,
Yeah.
one of the big things that I'm trying to push for right now is trying to make sure we can get those incentives tweaked so that folks don't just tear out their lawn and put in some.
Right, and put in gravel.
But
Yeah.
do more than that. If you're gonna take the time and the energy and the effort and create a new landscape, make sure that it captures your rainwater. Go for
Yeah.
the pond rain
Yeah.
tank. And then, of course, they don't want us to do gray water systems because that messes with their centralized recycled water, which should be package plants much smaller throughout the community to be more secure.
Right, right.
But so they're pushing back against that, and we should, we need to push on that too. But if you're going to make those investments in your landscape, don't just do the plants, So yeah, let's chat.
Yeah.
Let's have a chat.
Cool. All good.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Charles, for your questions. So Melanie, one quick question that I have that I just want to make sure gets recorded is, I saw some of your stats and I know it depends on the type of soil, but could you just provide an average or an estimate of like the recharging capacity that a nature-based solution has with regard to how much water you can basically get when you implement, I guess I would say, an average nature-based solution?
Right. So it really depends on how large it is, and it
Okay.
depends on the soil type entirely. I mean, you can see the range here from, if you've got clay soils, you might get an inch or two. But if you're in sandy and sandy loam soils, you can get as much as 14 inches an hour. And it really depends on the size and the soil type.
Okay.
So it's like, show me what you want to do. And I'll, if you were like, I'm going to do some rain grading in my yard and it's about this big and this deep, I could probably give, and these are the soils in my neighborhood, and you could find that out through the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service soil mapping. Then I could give you a rough estimate of what was going to happen, but the soils do vary all over the time.
Perfect. And one follow-up, just because I know we have Jen on this call and Andrew. I'm curious if you think there are like these kinds of projects that LAUSD or any type of school could implement with regard to their landscaping. Are you familiar with any schools or school systems that are engaged in native landscaping and these types of projects that sort of line up with what the River Project is doing? I'm just curious if there's an opportunity to implement solutions like this there and what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, you're talking to me? I thought you were asking them.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm asking you on behalf of Andrew and Jen, because I want
On behalf of them, got it, okay.
yes.
I was gonna try to find when we did our first water LA pilot, in the middle of our neighborhood area was an elementary school. So we included in our scope of work that we were gonna do a design for Ranchito Avenue Elementary School so that the school could manage its own rainwater on site. And we did that, and we got buy-in from the PTA, and we even got buy-in from some of the managers, but then we hit a wall when we got to, LAUSD. Now,
Okay.
things are shifting a lot. We still have that design, which I'm happy to, if anybody's working with the district and wants to propose something in Panorama City, low-income elementary school, we've got to start on that. But it's hard to push on more than one recalcitrant government agency at a time. And I think I rely on my colleagues to beat their heads against LAUSD.
Well, we appreciate that, and we are happy to advocate for these types of things. We also, I forgot to mention it, we also have a climate curricula committee that was instrumental in passing encouraging the passage of the climate curricula resolution through through LAUSD. So again, I'm hoping that this lines up with that curricula and that we could push for projects like this. And
Yeah,
then,
I mean, let's go for the habitat, let's go for the learning with the natives and with edibles and all of that good stuff in the shade. But you can manage stormwater without having to install a lot of off-the-shelf technologies. And for the most part, they're comfortable with off-the-shelf technologies. But I will say that Claire Robinson at Amigos de los Rios, who works more to the east of us here in the greater LA area. She's like LA up into San Gabriel. she's very committed to doing school retrofits and has some experience working with LAUSD and others, mostly other school districts, but she's done quite a few projects on school campuses that also manage stormwater along with reducing impervious surfaces and creating healthy, happy landscapes.
Okay, so it does sound like there's room for a partnership there. So I will keep that in mind. And thankfully, this call is recorded. And Cindy, did that answer your question as well? Because I saw that I think Melanie was addressing your question. there.
Oh, yeah, no, there's no conflict between river restoration and stormwater capture solutions proposed. I mean, what we're trying to do is restore ecosystem function. So that means the ecosystem of the waterways and the ecosystems of the lands that drain to them. We're trying to get back to something that functions throughout the watershed as close to it would have absent us.
Mhm.
And that should allow for both. The biggest thing for us is if we're going to have the waterways functioning as they should, we're going to need to give them some more space.
Perfect. So to summarize, mimicking nature or working with it versus
Both.
implementing the old school or like you said, 20th century based technologies for
Yeah, it
management.
has to be both. It can't just be mimicking, or it's got to be both.
Got it. And then, sorry, does anyone else have any questions for Melanie? I want to make sure that we answer those. And then Diana, once we're done with questions, you are free to make your announcement. Any questions? Going once, going twice? Sorry, it's my favorite bad joke that I like to make in meetings. All right, take it away, Diana, and then I will do one quick announcement about our next meeting. Melanie, you're welcome to join us for that because I want to announce next month's speaker, but go ahead, Diana.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. Appreciate it. Thanks, Melanie. That was a very interesting presentation, as was yours, Andrew, on water. I wanted to let everybody know that we are going to be hosting a hydrologist, Dr. Pablo Ortiz from the Union of Concerned Scientists will be our guest at our next chapter meeting, which is Tuesday, August 9th. And so at our July meeting, Andy gave that presentation to sort of whet our appetite, I guess I can use that word, and for water to get us started to think about it. We made some questions. So we're very excited about having Dr. Ortiz speak to us. I'll put the link so you can register for that in the chat. But also the other thing is that we are also hosting monthly presentations on one of, Melanie did a feasibility study on the Sepulveda Basin, how to reweld that, how to do all the things she talked about in this presentation, but focused on the Sepulveda Basin. So we'll be providing that presentation again later this month. And if you are interested, I think Charlie saw that, and I know Cindy's seen it. You're welcome to come back and see it again. I've seen it several times and I still learn by watching it. So if you're interested in that and bringing people to that, that's great. Let me know. The whole point we're trying to do is to get the word out in the larger community to get support for feasibility study. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for putting that together. So again, the LA chapter and the San Fernando Valley chapter are going to be focused on water. We're also, I just want to highlight, I don't want to downplay any of the other work that's going on. Jen, Cindy, and Lisa are working on sustainable agriculture. Andrew is working tirelessly with Kathy and Cheryl from the San Fernando Valley chapter on legislative and policy work. So if you're interested in working with any of them on that, feel free to reach out to them. If you're interested in, again, working on water and just, again, finding solutions to make sure that we have adequate supplies of water and that we actually eliminate drought and the potential for erodification, then reach out to Diana and I, and we're actually forming the greater water coalition between the two chapters. And again, we look to expand that as well. A few other things, I just want to close out the meeting with a couple more announcements. So next month, we'll actually be having Assembly Member Laura Friedman speak. She's not only a staunch environmental advocate. The reason I want to highlight her presentation and her speaking engagement is that she's on the water committee. So again, we can actually talk to her about the current water policies or lack thereof being considered by the California legislature. We can talk about the different proposals and we can bring up what I've discussed as well as what Melanie's discussed as far as really, to Melanie's point, having a more nuanced solution to the drought and having more nuanced and sustainable water infrastructure systems. And again, if anyone has any more announcements, feel free to put them in the chat. Beyond that, If you're looking for more ways to get involved, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to the general LA chapter email. We had a great mixer, but we'd like to see more people at our in-person events. So again, let us know what you're looking for in your chapter leadership, and we'll start trying to put those events together, whether they're virtual or in person. But thank you everyone for joining us. I'm gonna end the recording, but thank you, and I'll stick around in case people have questions. And again, I sincerely apologize about the technical difficulties. I changed jobs and therefore Zooms, and it didn't work out well. But the good news is that I will work with others to fix that in the future.
Hey, if anybody wants to see what we did for the school, I'll shoot screen share with you. You can see it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Melanie. Feel free.
So this was our way we analyzed the site, and these different color areas are different drainage areas, right? So the rainwater goes in a particular direction, several different. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, all those different drainage areas that go to different places on the campus. So that was our starting point, and then looking where we could add new trees. So that's how we started, and once we sized our approach to this for a larger storm than the city and county usually do. And then let me show you what sort of rendering looks like. It's just, I don't know, you probably won't be able to see many details, but the rendering includes very simple swales and berms and, using trees and, unpaving areas for play and adding shade and adding vegetable gardens as well throughout the site. But it ended up through some very simple, low-cost approaches to creating additional shade on the campus and cooling it and managing your like an inch of rain. A 1-inch rainstorm didn't leave the campus. So I don't want to take up any more time, but that's that.
No, thank you for sharing that. Really quickly, Melanie, if you don't mind answering this question, did you still keep the traditional asphalt playground? Was that still intact even with that plan?
Yeah, most of it, the traditional asphalt, we weren't, going to take that on. That somebody else can do.
Okay.
We were just looking at how to manage the stormwater on the site and doing it as sort of low cost as possible. What's the most cost effective way that could be within reach of the district?
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's again, food for thought. Please excuse something to drink on. So thank you for that sharing.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will stop the recording, but I'll hang around in case you have questions. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a good weekend. And here's to being more active in the future, because there's a lot to be done, clearly.